company should never have a designer do research on their baby, on their own product.
If you think that you can create one of the most brilliant products in the world without actually doing genuine, proper, good user research, then you're really setting yourself up to fail.
I've been approached by companies that say, okay, we want to do research. Oh, by the way, we've already budgeted this research and this is the amount, but we need you to produce this.
Especially executives or leaders that they say, oh yeah, we've been working with our customers for 20 years. We know what they want. We know what we need to. It sounds great to us. It sounds really cool, but the facts are the users don't want it.
It doesn't matter whether we know the sample size or anything. What we know is we've seen people have problems more than once.
Cory Lebson, principal of Lebsontech LLC since 2008. With 30 years of experience in UX research and strategy across different sectors, Cory is known for usability testing, research, and design workshops. He's also an author, speaker, and instructor. Join us as we explore UX with Cory Lebson.
Well, Cory, it's good to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you taking the time and coming to join us on Pulse. So to probably kick off, why don't you give us a bit of background about yourself? I know you've had extensive experience in the UX field, so give us a bit of background about yourself and your career to date.
Sure. Thanks, Julian. Great to be here. This is actually just about hitting year 30 right now, doing what we now call UX research. My first job was actually I was called a human factors engineer, but realized doing UX research, largely web-based, some products, some physical products, and I've loved it the whole time. It's been a great 30 years for me so far, and then I've done a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Been freelance since 2008, I've really just kind of went with wherever the water flowed, whatever came up. Like the little bit of this, a little bit of that included book and LinkedIn Learning and courses and speaking and training and all that stuff, which just makes the job extra interesting in addition to the research.
Awesome, mate. You have had a serious amount of experience in it, which I want to extract some of that today and discuss some of those things. But what first got you into it? I believe you studied psychology. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I was at the University of Maryland. I think it was in 1992. I took research methods in psychology, Psych 300, and I was sitting in the class and I said, well, you have to pick a professor to a professor's lab to work with. And there was one professor, Dr. Norman, and he was doing, I think it was actually a usability of restaurant menus, a research project on that. And I said, oh, that sounds really cool. I like computers, I like technology, I'll do that. And, it was just so enjoyable for me. It was just something I loved doing. And so even back then, what was that, 32 years ago, I really found what I enjoyed and kind of stuck with it.
Awesome. And how do you, from your, obviously, with the experience that you've had, how would you say, when you got back into it, the internet certainly wasn't mainstream. We didn't have things like, smartphones or phones that we call these days with apps. And there certainly wasn't basically everything at the touch of a finger, on a very small phone. And so how has it evolved? Love to hear from someone like yours perspective with this amount of experience, how that, especially the UX research part of it, has evolved over time throughout your time in it.
Yeah, for sure. So I was actually really lucky. Part of actually there's a minor non-UX detour I took where I really just got to fly. I mean, I don't know, I've been 22 years old. Got a gig, flying around the United States, teaching science teachers about this new thing called the internet. So I really got to be there, kind of, at ground level in some way of consumer use of the internet. And it was actually when I started, the internet couldn't be used for commercial stuff. It was only for universities, for nonprofit missions, that kind of thing. So I actually watched it become commercial, which is very cool. And I think in 1998, I got a job doing UX design and research of mobile systems. Now it was a Windows, I think it was Windows Mobile, it was called at the time, Windows CE maybe. And actually at the end, I think, back in my closet, I actually have the device at the end. They're like, these, and I was there for doing that for a couple of years. They're like, here, you keep this because we're not doing anything with it. So I still have a Windows Mobile. I don't think I've opened it. Battery probably doesn't even work. But yeah, but the tech. I think really the change is the technology. The technology, really keeps evolving. We see AI today as oh, this is revolutionary. Well, there's been a lot of those this is revolutionary things over the years. Research methods themselves haven't really changed all that much. I mean, certainly we've gotten more sophisticated technology to do the research. I mean, I was attempting asynchronous studies, even 20 years ago, but it was not nearly the same as what we have today. And for remote studies, yeah, I was doing it even 20 years ago too. But again, the infrastructure, the screen sharing abilities, the communication, the ability to stream audio, video, and a screen at the same time was way more clunky. That said, it's remarkably still clunky sometimes when technology doesn't work, because it doesn't work sometimes just because. But I think basically methods the same. The technology we use to do the research, much improved and continually improved, and the technology dramatically different, over time. And kind of you see all these things moving at different paces, which again keeps UX and UX research just really exciting.
Definitely, I would agree with that. And as things are progressing, I think fundamentally user experience, and I'd love to hear your comments on this, but it has never changed. Fundamentally, like at the end of the day, we're trying to get the same outcome. I'd love to get your kind of definition of what you think, well, what user experience is, and then probably more specifically what user experience research means to you.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I mean, there's an old ISO standard of it was usability at the time, and it was effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specified context of use. So that was usability. I want to say in the 90s. I want to say that was from the 90s. I'm not maybe the 80s, but I think the 90s. Got to look that up again. But anyway, that usability kind of definition is really true of UX today, of user experience, where really it's efficiency, effectiveness, and satisfaction of product users. I mean, granted, we now have really kind of a whole CX or customer experience component, where we're talking about, service, the service design, the kind of full set of interactions that a customer has with touch points, from the non-digital to the digital and so on. And I don't think we really talked about that, not in the same way, certainly, in the past. But by and large, really, I think it's essentially the same goals, the same mission to make people happy when they touch technology. I think it's largely stayed the same in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose from your perspective, like what role and how does like UX research influence product development or the improvement of products, etc. And what's the significance of that?
So, I think basically, I remember I had an experience with a client where they hadn't done research, right? And they released their product and they got just devastated with, this is awful. This doesn't work well. So then they said, oh, what? Yeah, this research thing we should do. Did the research and, oh yeah, you know what? It really is, and here's why. Here's ways to improve it. And I think, sure, you can be lucky and have something that people just like right off the bat, but that's kind of unlikely. Someone's vision or a company's vision is not going to have the input of the users of the product, of the customers of the company. And even if they do market research and they say, well, we know, the demographics of our users, we know the attributes, we know what they want. Great. But, ultimately, can these customers, can these users use the product? Can they use it efficiently, effectively, and are they satisfied? And I think many companies realize that. And in fact, in some ways, I'd say there was a very strong move to even perhaps overhire on research, and now we're have a little bit of a backlash in late 2023 into 2020, and now in 2024. We've got this little backlash of saying, oh well, it's so important, and there's a number of reasons why I think we have this, but suffice it to say. They're like, oh well, it is important, but there's too many people. Yeah, and it's a little bit of a mess right now in that. But to kind of get back to your original question, companies really do need to do research. They really need to do it multiple times, not just at the beginning, not just at the end. Really kind of iteratively understanding this will make it better. If I do this, I do this again, I do this again, I'm improving my product. I'm creating happy customers, or what
Yeah,
have you.
I totally agree, and I love hearing it from someone so experienced. But this is what we see in our projects as well and one of the we put so much emphasis in any projects that we work on in the discovery phase, and a big part of that is the research, which is obviously a user experience research, a customer research, and we often see it where especially executives or leaders that they say, oh yeah, we've been working with our customers for 20 years. We know what they want. We know what we need to, and especially around prioritization, right? And a lot of it comes back to like what we call shiny objects, right? It sounds great to us. It sounds really cool. Sounds really revolutionary and whatever else. But the facts are the users don't want it. And we've just wasted awful amount of budget building that product out. Great, it looks cool to us and everything else, but we haven't even spoken to users. And we'll see this with projects, and no doubt you've seen this as well across your career with heaps of large projects where they don't work. And I think you gave an example before, but you say, well, were you speaking to users, or did you do any research? Where's the research at? Where's the interviews? No, we already knew what we needed to build. It's like, well, there's the problem, right? So what are some of the common misconceptions about UX research? One of them being it doesn't need to be done, but like, what do you see, as just, is it a lot of the time we see it's just surface level. We just need to send blast a survey out to a heap of people, and that's our user research done, which is just couldn't be further from the truth kind of thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so certainly you have kind of, let's send a survey and that'll get a lot of information we need. Sometimes it's even let's do asynchronous research when you really need synchronous research. Well, we can do a lot of people really fast, but then you can't delve into a particular problem. And not that asynchronous doesn't have its place, but the synchronous kind of, oh, okay, we're following the script, but now we have to go off script to ask a little bit deeper questions about this problem you're having. There's also let's do a focus group. I've heard that a lot. Well, we need research. Let's do a focus group. Focus groups are what we do, which, I mean, focus groups do have their place in UX, but certainly much more, I think, in market research. And you can't assess usability in a group unless your context of use is people use this in the group. It doesn't make sense. You have, oh, well, if we do research, it's going to take 2 months because that's the way research has to do it. Which no, it doesn't. You can do it in a week or two. And there's also, like, oh, well, maybe we'll just do the research, very, very quickly when we have 5 audience groups that are having different context of use. Okay, that's a problem too. There's just, I probably, as I think, more and more, there's just so many different, and the thing is, there is no one right method. Ultimately, I think a good researcher will say, okay, what are we trying to solve for? And then back in the method to the problem that we're trying to solve, rather than saying, oh, okay, we need to do this method because, well, we need to do this method. Figure out what you need to solve for, figure out what hypothesis you need to come up with, and then go and do the right thing for that method with the right number of users that make sense. No, it probably doesn't have to be statistically significant. There are reasons it does sometimes, but many times, oh well, statistical significance is key. Maybe sometimes, but not necessarily. I really kind of right size the research for the problem at
Yeah,
hand.
no, I appreciate that. We've mentioned market research a few times here as well, and I'd love to get your thoughts on what are the differences between market research and then UX research. A lot of the time, they can be blended together, and they are very different things. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
For sure. So, I mean, market research by definition is understanding your market. Who can you sell to? Who might what are the attributes of the people, their wants and needs? Who might be your customers, who may be potentially using your product in the future. That's all understanding your market. And then that can feed into, okay, I understand my market. Now let's give them a thing to try, or let's we and there's well, let's start with the bridging area. The bridging area is, okay, if you had this thing, what would it look like? You could kind of just, and that kind of straddles both. But then once you have the thing, the website, the physical product, the whatever, that's when you're very solidly in UX research, where you're saying, okay, now I've got this thing. I need to understand, is it what people want and need, but also is it usable? Can they use it? Where did they get stuck? What are their pain points, and so on? And that's kind of the spectrum, from market research to UX
Yeah,
research.
I appreciate that. And when you're approaching a project like a UX research project, but how do you determine what the right approach is, or what necessarily the right methodology is? And I understand this might be a blend of those things and a blend of all different approaches, etc. But how would you typically approach on if someone came to you with a project of how you would go about getting that research completed effectively as possible?
I mean, so it really, it's very, ideally, it's very open. So you kind of start with this blank slate. Project comes. What do they have? They have nothing. They're saying this is a future thing. They have something, and it's a very low fidelity something. So it's a picture, for example, or a series of pictures. It's an old thing. It's an old website. It's an old product. Let's baseline and figure out what our pain points are on the old thing. It's a new thing that's fully formed. So whatever the thing is, that's where you kind of want to adjust to. Maybe you do involve some market research type questions kind of early on. And early on, if you want to brainstorm, a focus group could be great. Maybe and maybe you're doing in-depth interviews about experiences with an existing product. The IDIs. Maybe you want to figure out how something is organized. You do a card sort. You want to assess usability. You do a usability test. Basically you pick the thing that you're going to do, and sometimes you mix and match too. I've mixed card sort with usability study. I've mixed usability study with interviews. I've mixed interviews with focus groups. And you kind of can get at it from multiple perspectives. So you're going to kind of synthesize your information from multiple sources, and then you kind of get the story, the narrative, the big picture.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And one thing that we've found just through working on our projects, like one of the key ones for the kind of projects that we work on, etc., is really where we extract a large amount of that value on behalf of clients, etc., is with those one-on-one interviews and those deep dives into kind of, because a lot of the time we're working with an existing product that either needs to be rebuilt, or we can be can be looking at building a new product as well, but there's an existing relationship there where it is a bit of blurred lines between obviously customer experience and the user experience, but really getting into it to find out, okay, what are the current issues that you're having, and then linking that back as well just to the financials as well that are at play with the business, etc. And so where do you start with a user? What makes up a great user interview? What are some I suppose it's a hard question to answer, but what are some things that you look to do with those interviews and deep dives?
I mean, so kind of at the very beginning, a good screener helps identify or helps confirm that you're talking to the right people. So it's not just I think there's been some approach that says, oh, it doesn't matter who you talk to. You talk to anyone can be a user. That's not actually true. There's always going to be a bunch of people that are going to use your product, and there's going to be a bunch of people that aren't going to use your product. And making sure that you get the ones that are using your product and represent even multiple groups of users. And multiple groups of users doesn't have to be by demographic. But that's market research. What it has to do is it's context of use. Are they using your product in different ways? And so your good screener makes sure that you get the right people. A good script makes sure that you're aligned with the stakeholders, whether they're clients, they work at your company, they're your supervisor, whatever. You're aligned with them on what you should be asking. That said, a good script also gives you flexibility to go off script, because sometimes sometimes, like always, there's things that come up that you say, oh, we didn't think about that, but that's really interesting. And even if it means you don't get to everything on the script, it's okay, because there was something that was really important. So also having that flexibility to kind of go with the flow of the conversation, I think is very important. And then the output is important as well, where, okay, you've got maybe a recording, you've got some notes and so on, but that's, sure, stakeholders can see that if they want to, as long as they don't run with it without kind of getting the synthesis. But the synthesis is very, very important, where, a researcher will go and say, okay, so now we heard this, and this, let's kind of look at the composite. Let's look at this, let's form the story. And the story itself is the most compelling thing of all, where we kind of create this narrative based on the data, but the story is easy to absorb. It's easy to consume. So ultimately, the best output is in story form, in kind of a narrative kind of way, whether it's a PowerPoint deck that you're producing, or a doc, or a brief or whatever. It doesn't matter. It should be story-like, not fact. And the story should also include recommendations that adhere to UX best practices.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant advice. One thing I'd love to get your thoughts on is with like executives or stakeholders and how to get buy-in at that level that user research is important. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, of where especially it's a challenge with, if you've got dedicated UX research teams, it's probably a different story, but also getting those individuals or executives to understand the importance of it and the role that it plays, that we touched on a bit earlier, but in that product development process, it's something that I know we come up against, and just love to get your experience on that and how you demonstrate that it's a requirement, I suppose, not necessarily the data that you've gathered, but before actually getting into that process.
Yeah, so it's actually, I've been asked before, people say, oh, you're an external consultant, you're a freelancer. How do you make the case so you can get the work? And the answer is, in my role, my answer is I don't. I don't have the in into the company to be able to say, okay, well, I'm an external researcher, and I'm going to come into your company and do research. I mean, the odds of being successful seem fairly low. So I think the thing is, you need the base thing that you need is to have a little bit of an in. So the in could be, well, we're doing this thing, which is, it could be interviews, and by the way, we can also do a usability study. hey, can we go ahead and do that? The in could be, a personal connection with someone where you say, hey, we know each other really well. We've been working together. Or you could be in a company as a researcher and say, oh, you know what? Maybe we can add this thing. But it's additive. It's not, okay, hi, I'm here. Let's just go jump in and do the thing. So basically, I think having that in is very important. If you're an employee of a company, you're hired for this. Can it expand a little bit? And expand a little incrementally over
Yeah,
time.
definitely. I agree. It's obviously a little bit different for us, but it's the same kind of thing where I quote this a bit, but it's not our job to convince you that there is necessary, if that makes sense. I'm not going to try and convince you that research is the right thing to do. If that's where you're positioned, then we're probably not interested in working with you in that regard. If you're hard down that line, not saying that we don't need to help people see the power of it and help people see all of that. That's absolutely our job. But if you think that you can create one of the most brilliant products in the world without actually doing genuine, proper, good user research, then you're really setting yourself up to fail. And I'm not going to try and sit here and convince you all day otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. And I've had that conversation too. I mean, I've been approached by companies that say, okay, we want to do research. Awesome. And they're like, oh, by the way, we've already budgeted this research and this is the amount, but we need you to produce this. And I'll say, I can't take on the project. And they say, well, why? Some is better than none. I say, okay, fine. But if I do this, you get this. And if you want me to do this and produce that, then I can't be successful. And if I can't be successful and don't feel like I can be successful, then I'd rather not do it than fail. Or feel like, I'm not set up for success. So, ultimately it's right, making sure you right size, what the research budget is with what the expectations are and making sure that they are aligned, in order to be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it may involve spending more, but to get a better return over the long term, right? And the point of it is that we're not building something that's just like people look at it and they go, oh yeah, but it's going to cost us a fair bit more to do it. And it's like, yeah, but you're basically guaranteeing yourself a return. If you don't do it, you're gambling pretty much that you are building something that users actually want, or you're setting up a project plan or whatever it is. You're not validating. You just got assumptions that aren't being validated with users, and I find it fascinating because it is something that we come up against, but it's my position is the same as yours on it. It's very much that if that's the stance that's being taken, then we're not interested, because we're going to be fighting a losing battle. And we know if we talk to users, we do the research properly, we set it all up, we can create something of real value here and deliver enterprise value for the organization. But if we don't, we're going to run into challenges. So I'd love to probably segue into some of the most common challenges that you see across, UX research and either at working with stakeholders or executives, but also just actually implementing it and doing that. And what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen across your career and how you overcome them?
Okay, I mean, certainly getting buy-in for the research, and even if you're there as a researcher to say, well, like for example, the this and the this kind of thing, how are they aligned? Make sure they're aligned. Um, I'm a big advocate for kindness and niceness. And sometimes you have very irritable stakeholders, who, personally, again, I feel like if people are irritable in the initial discussions of, oh, should we work together? Again, that's a like, no, I don't want to take on this project. Because I think, kindness, is something, and being just nice to each other and having that kind of work environment, is reduces barriers to that communication, and ultimately makes research more successful. Um, Also, I prefer not to toss findings over the fence. That is, where stakeholders are like, okay, well, you'll do the research and then you'll get back to me with the report. I'm not involved at all. Which is, if they want me to do that, I have done it sometimes. I don't like it so much because my impression has been when that happens, they're doing it obligatorily to do research. There's nothing, there's no ability to, there's no buy-in really when it. Oh, I got this report thing, this PowerPoint, this whatever. I'll mention it to my team. Really getting stakeholders to be as involved as possible. Can we work together to do that? I know it's more time for you, the stakeholders, but can we work together? Can we make it better? Can we make sure we're aligned at every point? Can you watch the research while it's taking place when it's real time research, and then let's talk. Hey, let's even have a real time chat. I like WhatsApp, on my computer screen, as I'm talking. So I could, say, hey, oh, I really like this conversation. Can you ask a little bit more about it? Okay, sure. And making the research their own in that way. Sure, it takes more time, but it definitely adds value. To get them to kind of buy into involvement, I think is very important. And using the research just generally is also something where they could say, well, we should do this research, do the research, you do the research, and then it sits there. Maybe it sits in a report, maybe it sits in a research repository, it doesn't matter, it just sits there. But making sure that, yes, we're going to act on the research, or we're going to say, okay, this thing is too expensive to change right now, so we have a method for putting it, in queue for 3 months from now, 5 months from now, 6 months from now, our bigger release later on, making sure that it doesn't get lost.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. And what would you say are some of the just segueing off the back of that, but some of the best practices that you would follow, or principles for research across the board that, let's say you're to take on an engagement or you're working on a project or whatever, what are some key, let's say the client isn't irritable and they are invested in it, they're bought into it, but what are you looking for as like, okay, well, these are the pillars to success. This is what we need.
Well, certainly the good screener and script is important, but and also setting a baseline of flexibility is important. Being able to have a product that's testable for what they want to test is important. So, for example, it's fine to test a low fidelity wireframe mock-up, what have you, as long as you're not looking for results of complex interactions, which aren't achieved. So making sure the product is appropriate, making sure that you do enough sessions to get the data, because sometimes you may say, well, sure, 5 sessions can do it. You do 5 sessions, and you're like, you know what, we don't really have our answers just yet. Can we add a couple more? Being able to be flexible in that regard, or conversely, you have 15 sessions scheduled. You say, okay, well, we're going to do this really robust, and by 10, you're like, okay, we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Let's just move with the reporting. Making sure that things are delivered in the right time. So if they say, well, we need this report or these findings by this date, 3 days from now, then no, you're not creating a fancy, not like the most incredible visual report ever. You're getting the findings of what you can do in 2 or 3 days. It might be simpler, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'd love to get your thoughts as well. Like how much in your work, but do you use? I suppose it's hard to break down, but it is also depend on the project. But how often are you spending most of your time doing much more one-to-one research, where you're doing those one-to-one interviews? How much do you split down with kind of larger scale surveys and stuff that's probably more quantitative based, etc.? Like, what's your breakdown there, and what do you tend to, I suppose, prefer? It's not necessarily a black and white question, but
Yeah. So I mean, back in the day, back in 25 years ago, I was even doing some statistics. I was doing large data sets, looking at statistical significance, but I was also doing qualitative data. And what I discovered, 25 years ago, is that I like the qualitative research much better. I just enjoy it. So, as a freelancer, certainly I've done survey research. I've know how to create good questions and get the data. I think I'm pretty rusty on the statistics at this point. At least to the level I was before. But but I just really enjoy the qualitative. So when I again being somewhat boutique in freelance work, I say, you know what? Oh, you want a survey? It's not something that's really my superpower. It's something I could do. And if you say I want qualitative data and a little bit of quantitative data too, sure, I've done that. Set up something simple in SurveyMonkey or in using Google or whatever. Sure, I've done it, but I really, really stick to the bulk of my work being synchronous qualitative research. That's definitely what I do most. I mean, the two most popular methods that I do are usability testing and interviews, often a combo of the two. There's the occasional focus group, occasional card sort. When appropriate. There's occasional click testing when appropriate. But by and large, the bulk is usability testing method number one, user interviews or IDIs method number two.
Okay, very very interesting. And for someone listening that probably maybe an executive or someone working in that isn't as familiar with this, like how would you describe kind of quantitative versus qualitative data? Very simply, just in simple terms.
I mean, quantitative is shallower, but you get potentially statistical significance. You could say with confidence, here's our answers. And you can ask many questions. You can even get some free-form responses too. So there is a qualitative component to quantitative data. In the United States, you also sometimes need to quantify. You need to quantify qualitative data, for example, for FDA, Food and Drug Administration approval of medical devices and things like that. So that's kind of you get a little bit of both to some extent. Not necessarily fully statistical in the same way, but you do need larger numbers. And then qualitative data, certainly can be very generative. Whereas the quantifiable aspects could be summative. That is, you just need to know, can it be used or not? Once you get to the generative or the formative kind of research, really your answers are now not aggregating. I mean, you don't want to say, well, X percentage of your users experience this and X percentage will experience that, because it's not going to tell you that. Really, it's saying, how can we make this product better? How can we generate new ideas? How can we improve by understanding, oh, maybe this is a good thing to try next? And also, when we do generative research, we're going to iterate more. Whereas you don't necessarily get the data you need from a survey, for example, to know how to iterate. You can know some people are happy or not happy with the company or the product. But when you're doing generative research, you say, okay, now that we've seen people get stuck here, we can improve this thing, and then we can test it again and see, okay, now is it better? It doesn't matter whether we know the sample size or anything. What we know is we've seen people have problems more than once, for example.
No, I think that's a great explanation. How would you say UX research kind of integrates more into the overall business strategy or customer experience? I know you touched off on it before, probably just before even getting into that. Like, what do you feel is the difference between UX and CX, or user experience and customer experience? How would you define that difference?
I mean, so kind of in real world, CX is often much more the quantitative bend. When you get those, how likely are you to recommend us? Scale of 1 to 10. That's the CX side of things. CX aligns with really kind of the entirety of the experience a customer has with a company. It also includes service design, where you're really kind of looking at the entirety of experience. UX is often more focused on the product or products that the company produces, and also tends to have more of the qualitative side of things. I mean, not exclusively, for sure. I mean, you can have qualitative research with CX, but UX tends to tip more qualitative, even though you can have mixed methods as well and go more quantitative as
Yep.
well.
No, I appreciate that. And what would your comments be on, like, maybe even sharing a story, etc., but where user research is you've seen in products, or like driving innovation, like where do you bring that in? Obviously, it's very much focused on a product, and it's not necessarily on the service design or the CX side, etc. But within the product itself, um, you know, a lot of the time people think about user research as just, oh, let's find out what the problems are and we'll fix the problems. But there's also so much insight and opportunities that are lost in not, I suppose, spotting the opportunities and the the opportunities for innovation. So, what are your comments on that?
I mean, so often when you start to hear those things, like when you get brainstorming from, so it could be brainstorming in a usability study, for example. Oh, this is great, but I really wish this. Or you ask the interview style questions within the usability study, where you say, if you could have anything you want, what would it be? Or you take that to the interview itself, and you just do an interview, and you kind of start looking for those blue sky kinds of things. Let's really brainstorm. Or you take it to the focus group. And the focus group, while not good for usability testing, can be really good for brainstorming, where people bounce ideas off of each other. And then you kind of, the ideas get bigger and bigger, as the discussion goes on, particularly with the kind of the right set of people recruited to kind of build on each other. And then you can say, okay, well, here are just kind of big ideas for the future. Often the big ideas aren't, if you get little usability tips, you could take them immediately, run with them, and so on. When you get the big ideas, often that feeds more into the strategic. So now we get the big ideas. Let's process them in a strategy workshop of some kind, and then you kind of can run with it by creating new products or new mock-ups of products or what have you.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And just leading on to a point around that, is there any strategies you use? It's very difficult to, it's like putting value on branding, but with user research, like how do you demonstrate that return on investment? And what are the strategies you use to demonstrate continued investment?
So to some extent, I don't get that opportunity because as a freelancer, they want the research. I come in, I do the research. Often it's not so iterative, or sometimes I'll come in, for example, I'll be the backup because a company will overflow their research. They have too much research going on. So I get to come in and then I leave. So, to a large extent, I wish I had the opportunity. And also people will say to me, oh, well, what's the outcome? Like, what happens after you do the research? And my answer often is, I don't know. I don't know what happens because I jump in, I jump out. There's been some times where I've certainly had a longer period of time and, have gotten to actually, participate in project management kinds of meetings where we say, okay, we did this back here a year ago. We did this. Look, we're seeing, anecdotally, people are able to use this product better, for example. But for me, those kind of conversations don't happen so much when I'm kind of jumping in and jumping out as much as I am in my
Yeah,
role.
no, definitely makes sense. And obviously, as you say, anecdotally, it turns up, and eventually, if keeping it simple, if we're building a better product, we're going to be generating better profit. We're going to be getting more revenue. Essentially, we're going to be getting more word of mouth. At the end of the day, it will be showing in the results of the growth of the business, pretty much. And so, with the communicating these findings, and you explained, you touched on it a bit before about what the key piece really being the story and building that story out and making it, putting the findings in there, but also making it relatable and etc. But how would you say some strategies in your approach to building out that story, crafting that story, so you're taking all of the research you've done, and really positioning it in a way to the stakeholders that is understandable and actionable, and possibly to especially stakeholders that probably aren't as familiar and detailed with the UX side of things or the research.
Right. So number one that I find really valuable are video clips. First of all, record sessions unless there's a reason that you can't record them for political or kind of things are too private or whatever. If you can record sessions, record them, and then and obviously making sure you have appropriate consent forms for your participants, knowing they're being recorded, but only used internally. And these days, they'll often ask, "Oh, are you sure this won't end up on YouTube?" So certainly making sure that all that's kind of above board and appropriate. But then creating these video clips, I often tell clients, I'll take without even knowing what the findings will be. My report, my PowerPoint deck are going to have 5 embedded video clips, which may span multiple participants having the same issue. And video clips, certainly have become easier when they're words, because there's a number of products where you can look at the transcript, kind of say, I want from point A of the conversation to point B of the conversation, and it just clips it out like that, which has become way easier than before you could tie together a transcript and the video clips. That said, for usability testing, it's often not based on the words. So then it becomes a little more complicated because you actually just need to go into the video. You need to know it's somewhere around this point. You select the start time and the end time, and then you just go and clip it. And certainly that still takes as long as it's always taken. There's been no amazing process in speeding that up over time. But I think that's really my number one, is that saying, hey, if we have the time for it, I'd love to include 5 or 6 video clips embedded, because I know regardless of what the findings are, and then before I do the report, I'll say, well, here's my idea for 5 or 6 video clips. Hopefully you've watched the sessions. Do these sound good to you? And I've also done them before, and then a stakeholder wants this one more that will help make their case fine. So you run in and do the final one. But yeah, that's definitely number one, I think, for telling your story is, well, don't just listen to me, listen to the people who I talk to.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's the same thing we find in our projects as well, is that especially as a third party, and I would want to touch off on this as well, when you're this is probably getting more specific into the interviews and that kind of thing, but when I'd love to get your experience with this, but we've found that coming in as a partner on behalf of a client or a product, we extract so much more information than what they could have themselves, especially at a qualitative level. And we find out things that may have even been attempted by the client themselves to a degree, and may not necessarily perfectly, but in some fashion had been attempted, but they just for reasons that the actual clients of the client just aren't prepared to share that level of information with them, and don't feel comfortable doing it. And then we get to find out these insights that they've never really found out. So what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly I've heard many times someone says, we're hiring you because you're that independent third party, where you can have this outside perspective. You can kind of step out of the box a little bit. You can not use the acronyms that kind of have gotten stuck in our heads. And being an independent third party in that regard has been helpful. As a reason people may want companies, freelancers, consulting firms, agencies, and so on to do the work. So I think that can add value. I will say also, I believe designers can be researchers, and researchers can be designers, as long as they're experienced no matter what, whether you're a designer. However, companies should never have a designer do research on their baby, on their own product. I've literally heard designers say things like, I designed this feature to be this, this, and this. What do you think? It's so hard to step away when it's very, very close to you. So even if a company says, well, you're doing design and you can do the research, hopefully it's the research of somebody else's design. That's the big no-no, I'd say, is design and research are fine together, but either hire the kind of external freelancer agency, consulting firm, or what have you, or say, well, we have these 2 different products. Okay, designers flip-flop. And step away from your own product, because I think that's where a company will get into trouble the most, where research does become biased because it's just so hard to step away from your baby.
Yeah, I find that, I think it's amazing, and I definitely agree with that. And I just know through to work in projects myself is that, like, even just I don't know how to describe it as a human. You're just like, oh, well, I did that. There's a reason I designed it this way, right? If that makes sense. Like you've done the best of your ability. Obviously, like no one would, they've done the best they can, and so questioning that and questioning those assumptions, it becomes very difficult for yourself if you're the one that's designed it. And I think that's brilliant. I know you have a lot of experience with, obviously, your 30th year in being in this field, so you got a lot of experience. I know you've done a lot of talks. You've written a book about UX careers and all of that. I love your analogy about the cheesecake and all the different countries, and it's you can peel back the layers, but it may be cheesecake, but it's a bit of a different blend and all of that. But I'd love to get you to distill it down into, if someone's looking for a career in UX or UX research more specifically, like what are if you were to advise someone, what would be the key skills that you think they need to have to begin with?
Sure. So I think being, well, the first of all, I will say at this exact moment, well, so research took a hit, like I said, in 2023 and into 2024. So it's a little harder to get a research job at this exact moment. That said, don't get discouraged. I think we're on the upswing again, and the research jobs will be plentiful, again. But it's going to take a couple more months, I think. Maybe even into 2025 before I believe, before we're going to start to see kind of more of the full rebound, where everyone who was laid off is rehired again, or at least who wants to be, and then we have more openings and so on for new positions. So just keeping that in mind, so you don't get discouraged. Anyone watching this. I will say that I think being open minded is very important. Where you don't know what you're going to see at any given time. Don't like you have to be able to remove yourself from assumptions. Being, like I said, kind. I think being nice to the stakeholders, to everyone around you, helps you also. One that's just nicer, but also it helps you get the buy-in you want. Being flexible, where you can say, well, I was going to do this, but now maybe we need to do this, or we need to adjust, is also very important. Being empathetic, to whatever extent you can, and really kind of feeling those pain points of your users, certainly is important. Being analytical, so you want to be able to kind of critically analyze anything you get. Being creative, is a UX researcher a creative? Because UXers are called creative, so is a researcher creative? I think the answer is yes. Certainly, I feel like there's a lot of creativity embedded in. Okay, here's the problem. What's the solution? And the creativity is often not only in the creation of the research, but also in kind of deriving solutions, which you may or may not be illustrating, or you may be creating personas or journey maps, or what have you. So you are exhibiting that creativity as well. So being creative, I think, is important. And if you're in a big business, I don't know that business skills inherently are as critical. But if you're in a small business, or you're actually want to be a freelance researcher, understanding business for the sake of business is very valuable. You just understanding how business works, understanding business finance to some degree. Those are certainly valuable as well, particularly if you want to kind of run your own micro business like I do. That's certainly important. So that collection, I think, is the perhaps softish skills that make for a good researcher, as well as domain knowledge of UX. So if you're, for example, a market researcher who has not a usability study before, you can pick up the methods of a usability study fairly easily. But you still need to understand UX as okay, these are best practices, because when you give findings, those findings need to be embedded in UX best practices.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I think all really, really great advice. If you were to kind of recommend someone build a career in UX research, I'd love to get your thoughts on a lot of the time, especially in smaller products, smaller companies, like there's designers, you got product designers, you got UI designers, you got UX UI designers, you got UX researchers, you got UX designers. Where, do you feel that a UX researcher can be a very successful researcher without being a designer?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think there are different. There's certainly different roles out there. There are. I mean, if you even now, if you look, in a job board, LinkedIn, otherwise for UX research roles, there's plenty of them. Sometimes the research roles start getting a little too broad and unicorn-like, where they start saying, "Well, there's a researcher, but by the way, you need not only design but visual design. Really understanding how to create good artwork, essentially, that's user friendly, as well as coding. And you start to kind of combine all these, which gets really hard. Not that you can't necessarily do it, but you're not going to be expert in everything, and certainly not all at once. And yes, there are definitely research jobs. There are jobs that are focused on doing the research, where you're going to be basically just doing research projects, and chugging through the projects. You'll be an individual contributor, and there's jobs ultimately, if you want to be in management, there's jobs where you'll be overseeing the research, and you'll be overseeing other researchers, and you'll be doing things perhaps together, or if the company's big enough, maybe only focus on the overseeing part. But yes, there's certainly dedicated jobs. That said, it's certainly not bad to have some basically UX design skills as well. And perhaps that can broaden your base potential, but also what you enjoy. I mean, I've done some UX design. I don't enjoy it. I don't feel like it's my superpower like research is. It depends on what your inclination is. Like what you the job seeker like.
Yeah, definitely. How on a longer term basis, when you're working, when you're building out longer term, I know it's a bit different for you personally with what you're doing in the work and how you're conducting it. But if you've got a team that's working full time on a product or something, how important is that relationship between kind of researcher and UX designer, where you've got the person working on the low fidelity design, etc. But is it important that there's a continuous relationship there where there's good understanding and a good cohesive team, or is that not as important as having a good handover once the research is done and you kind of leave it to the design team? Or what's your opinion on that?
I mean, I've seen. I don't think there's one right answer. I mean, I've seen certainly both, where you've got teams where you've got researchers and design, like people focus mainly on research, people focus mainly on design. They're working in the company and they're working well together and they have a good relationship and so on. I've seen teams where it's often more throw it over the wall kind of thing, where everything kind of funnels through a project manager, program manager, whatever. Oh, here's research. Okay, let's put in the repository. Okay, designers, take a look at the repository. And then you don't really necessarily talk so much. But certainly having that communication is good. But it's true even externally too. I mean, where even if you're an external researcher and you come in, having that good communication, even for a transient period, is also certainly very valuable. So I think having good communication is good regardless. But being able to have teams communicate with each other, I think it is very valuable in terms of making sure that you get that buy-in, not only from the higher ups, but from the ones who actually create the design.
Awesome. That's amazing. I think we've had a really really good conversation so far, and we do a finale segment. Appreciate what you've shared so far, but I do a segment where I ask a couple of questions just from every guest, and so I'd love to get into those now with you, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the first one is, what's one thing you believe businesses are not paying enough attention to right now that will be critical in the next 5 years?
Um, I know this is kind of cliche, but I don't think businesses are paying the right attention to AI. They're focused much more on, well, can we build AI into a chatbot? Can we, can we leverage AI in our website? What they're not focused on is, particularly in kind of the UX space, is where is AI strong and where can it help our design and our research, and where is AI, and just because AI can do something doesn't mean you should. So, for example, synthetic users might be equivalent to a heuristic review, looking for best practices, but it's not talking to real users. So being able to understand the nuances of AI, I think, is lacking somewhat, and businesses need to focus on that very, very quickly, because it's going to, that is the change of the decade, perhaps. So we do need to be aware of that.
Awesome. Second one is, what legacy do you want to leave in your industry? How do you hope your work will influence or shape the future?
I mean, so for me, I produce lots of content. How much, I've been around, 30 years, probably 50, the content has spanned only about 15 of those, the last 15. And perhaps I figure I've got another, what, if I'm 50 now, maybe another 20 years before I retire. I want some of that content to kind of, ideally, live on and be referenced. But I also, hope that some of that content can also inspire other people. To start, like, people starting their careers today are going to be around much longer. So if I can inspire people, to get into UX now, it's not the ground floor like I was, but there's still a lot that's going to happen over the next 20 years, next 30 years, next 50 years. And probably it's not going to be called UX anymore. It's going to be called something we don't even know yet. But be on the ground floor of that. Again, we don't know what it is, but I hope, I hope I can have a role in helping new people, start up.
Awesome. Very inspiring. And the final one is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career? I think it links a little bit to just what you said.
I mean, if I think about it, I actually was very interested in a PhD in social science, even after I was doing UX. I was still doing UX as I was working on my PhD program, and I ended up taking all the coursework necessary for a PhD in sociology. And I was like, but then actually a professor said to me, he's like, your passion is not here. I think your passion is in business. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So I left with a terminal master's in that, quickly got an MBA, just to get some business. And then I thought to myself at that point, no, my first kid was born in 2000. And I thought to myself at that point, I'm like, oh, if I had done a PhD, and interested in business, should have a PhD in business. So I think to myself, and I still think to myself, if I have time one day, and right now I'm too busy doing the research, it'd be fun to go back. If I could go back in time and say, well, which PhD program should I have been doing? I would have been interested in that business one, I think, to then tie it back to UX. But I actually really enjoy business for the sake of business, like understanding business processes, and so on. That's one thing I think, oh, if I could have done that PhD program over, done it, maybe still gotten the MBA, but done that earlier on, gotten it in business. That said, I still was a good academic program for what I was. I ended up, getting those sociology and MBA. But it would have been exciting for me. I like the academia, so might have been exciting, and might eventually do it. I'll check back in 20 years when I do retire, maybe. But
Awesome. Well, awesome. It's been a very insightful conversation for me, and I'm glad to have had you on, and I appreciate you taking the time, and sharing your experience and all your insights. If anyone listens found this episode today insightful, head over to our learning center at intuji.com. There's a heap more resources. You can check out our other channels on YouTube, etc., as well, for our other episodes, and don't hesitate to reach out to us with any suggestions or comments. We'd love to hear them. So thanks once again, Cory. Really appreciate your time, and it was a great chat.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me, and great to talk with you.
Thank you.